Since we've worked our way through 90 years of A Christmas Carol adaptations already, we've talked about some of the most iconic Ebenezer Scrooges of all time. The actors that when you hear the name Scrooge, you picture them. Alistair Sim, George C. Scott, Michael Caine, Mr. Magoo. However, there is one iconic Scrooge who may have never played him on film or TV, but he did play him for nearly 20 years. In 1934, Lionel Barrymore played Ebenezer Scrooge on the radio for the first time, beginning an annual tradition. However, even though it was a tradition, Barrymore did not play Scrooge on the same show every year, and the script was not always the same. In fact, some of the existing shows were from a half-hour broadcast, while others were an hour. It's one of the most influential books ever written. Even if you've never read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, you are familiar with it. My name is Colin Murr, and I've loved this story for as long as I can remember. I'm going to be taking a look at all of the movie and TV adaptations of A Christmas Carol that I can, because I love the story that much. This is Scrooge, the Christmas Carol podcast. The audio Christmas carols, the Lionel Barrymore years. Unsurprisingly, there are many versions of A Christmas Carol that have been recorded in an audio format, and radio was not the first medium. I'll go over the earliest versions on another episode, because on this one, I'll be talking about the most iconic sound-only Scrooge, Lionel Barrymore. Many of the radio broadcasts starring Barrymore are lost, and I'll be honest, I don't see any official citation on where every last version aired. I'm taking some of this from Golden Age of Radio bloggers, which don't always agree, so I'm doing my best. If I'm wrong and you know for sure or you have an actual source on it, please correct me. Lionel Barrymore first played the role on Christmas Day 1934 on a show called CBS Christmas Party, a 2-hour holiday program that his Christmas Carol was just one part of. The next year, he began playing the part on Christmas Day on a show produced by Campbell's Soup. It may have been called Hollywood Hotel, as they produced the show around the time, but it's not stated. We do know it was Campbell's Soup. The year after that, it was definitely Hollywood Hotel, but Lionel Barrymore's wife died on Christmas Eve, and his brother John took over the role in his stead. In 1937, Lionel was back to the role on Hollywood Hotel. In 1938, MGM produced a film version of A Christmas Carol that was to star Lionel as Scrooge, but he suffered an injury and was unable. The earliest of these versions we have is the 1938 radio version, but like with the film, Barrymore did not play Scrooge. It had been established as a tradition by this time, but this year he did not partake. In 1938, Orson Welles' radio show The Mercury Theater on the Air began, where Welles and his theater troupe, many of whom would later appear in a little film called Citizen Kane, performed adaptations of famous works of literature. On one Halloween broadcast of the show, he adapted H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, which led to some public outcry from audience members who were not aware of the concept of fiction, apparently. The show technically ended in December, but it really just evolved into the Campbell Playhouse, which, like with the previous show I mentioned, was sponsored by Campbell Soups. For 2 consecutive years, this show aired A Christmas Carol, produced by Orson Welles. In 1938, when Barrymore was unable to play Scrooge, they brought in a last-minute replacement of Orson Welles. That's right, there's a version of A Christmas Carol where Orson Welles plays Scrooge. Like I said, this one exists, but this episode today is about Lionel Barrymore. I am going to talk about this one in the future, trust me, but not on this episode. In 1939, Lionel Barrymore came back to the role, again on the Campbell Playhouse with Orson Welles. The production was an hour long, and it featured other members of Welles' troupe in other roles. Because this is Orson Welles, this one is very well documented, and we obviously have the audio for this one as well. This documentation will not be the case in the other versions I talk about later, but here we've got Everett Sloane as Jacob Marley, George Caloris as the Ghost of Christmas Present, and Erskine Sanford as Fezziwig. Georgia Bacchus, who has a small role in Citizen Kane as a library attendant, is Mrs. Cratchit here, And Ray Collins, who you'd also know from Citizen Kane as the politician that Kane runs against, is credited some places, but not to a specific character. So he's probably here. He was a member of the troupe, but he's not credited to a specific part. I can't make it out. Of all the Lionel Barrymore versions we have from the radio, there is no doubt that the Mercury Theater version is the one that has the most love behind it. Barrymore is strong.
I can tell you, if you use coal at that rate, you and I will soon be parting company, Bob Cratchit.
The supporting cast backs him up nicely, and goes without saying, but Orson Welles is a great narrator. More than anything, though, it's the atmosphere that sells this one. You'll see later ones kind of rush through things, being just half an hour and all, but this one builds atmosphere. The music is great throughout. Although there is one fascinating musical moment we'll get to. I don't want to say it's bad, but you'll see. The moment for me that defined this adaptation of the story is a small one, a very small one, but it shows the care and passion put into building atmosphere. This is obviously contrasting Cratchit and Scrooge's respective walks home after closing up on Christmas Eve.
The office was closed in a twinkling, and Bob Cratchit, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide on Cornhill 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play with his family at Blind Man's Buff. Scrooge, on the other hand, took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern.
That happy, jolly music that immediately changes, quite naturally, into something morose and minor key. It's perfect. Of all the traditional mediums by which a Christmas carol can be told, radio would seem to be the hardest. On one hand, the novel was written to be read aloud to an audience. However, as radio theater, especially under a time crunch, it's much harder. A lot of radio versions find themselves rushing through, but for the most part, this one doesn't. Part of that, of course, is because the music, being an Orson Welles production, is by Bernard Herrmann, who we've talked about way back in the second episode. He composed the memorable music for the 1954 Shower of Stars version. Yeah, it's not exactly a hot take that Bernard Herrmann knew how to write an atmospheric score, but yeah, he did, and it really works well here. For example, the early stages of the story have to establish who our characters are. Scrooge is the main one, of course, but we've got to get Bob Cratchit in there too. If we see him on film, we can see him working diligently at his desk, shivering, trying his best to keep a smile on his face, but I think there's a great little introduction to the character here as he's singing along with carolers outside.
21 and 22. Merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. 23, 26, 29.
Bob Cratchit!
Yes, Mr. Scrooge?
Stop that infernal caterwauling.
Yes, sir.
Again, instead of just the narrator telling us about him, it's an organic character moment. We get nice scenes with Fred and the charity workers, but there is a little moment in the charity workers scene that I think is condensed poorly.
Besides, I've only your word for it that all this is so.
The truth, Mr. Scrooge.
So be it then.
Simply saying, that's your word, but it's true, doesn't really accomplish much. I'll admit I'm biased. This little exchange is one of my favorite in the whole book. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that. But you might know it, observed the gentleman. That second part of the exchange is often left out. They often have the surplus population bit, of course. But I really love that little bit there. It shows Scrooge willingly acknowledging that he's turning away from the truth, and the charity worker wants him to see the light. It will be a less black and white world when he knows it, but it will also give him empathy for others. Like I said, Orson Welles has a level of gravitas that few actors could ever match, and he just does some wonderful scene setting here.
Scrooge walked through his rooms to see that all was right. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet. Closed the door.
I can't pin down the voice on Christmas Past. I can't find anything suggesting who it is. So maybe it's uncredited for a reason. I don't know. But I like the voice a lot, as it sounds both distant and empathetic.
And there's snow upon the ground. Where are we?
These are the shadows of the things that have been. You recognize this countryside?
Oh, I know every inch of it.
I also like how this takes its time in setting the scene for us at Fezziwig's. It feels very in character and works as exposition when we hear Scrooge describing everything around him, the food and the drink and the partiers. Again, it uses the medium very well, as a benefit, not a detriment. The past sequences are all quite good here. We even get that breakup scene with Belle and the scene of Belle and her husband afterwards. In Christmas Present, we really only get a scene of the Cratchits, but through Wells' narration, we actually get the impression that Christmas Present is happening on a much grander scale. He makes quick mention of miners underground and sailors at sea, and unlike so many versions, it's not glaringly obvious when it switches from Dickens' text to Wells. I mean, fair. This is the guy who wrote Touch of Evil, but still, it's impressive that he could write something that sounds so much like Dickens' text.
Many calls Scrooge made that night with the ghost of Christmas Present. Down among the miners they went who labor in the bowels of the earth, and out to sea among the sailors at their watch. Dark, ghostly figures in their several stations.
Even that bell in the background adds to it. Everything about this works. It could be a clock chiming the hour, or it could be sailors at sea ringing a bell. All those little touches are so strong. And as I talked about in the 1984 episode, those are really the kinds of things that really make me love an adaptation. You can get the big stuff, great. That's very important. But when you add those little touches, that really goes a long way for me. That's what works. The only part that doesn't quite work is Christmas Yet to Come. It doesn't just rush to the graveyard or anything, as we do get a scene with the Cratchits, but nothing with the men outside the exchange or the people selling Scrooge's things. We get the Cratchit scene and the graveyard scene, so it's not a complete loss. But it does kind of leave out the loneliness of it all. It's an audio version, but they still leave the ghost silent, which is a solid atmospheric choice. It lets Scrooge talk things out for himself instead of, well, what we'll get in these later versions. Christmas Yet to Come may be rushed, but the Christmas morning scenes are thankfully not. There is one moment, however, that throws me a bit. Listen to this.
In my own room. And the sun. The sunshine. It's clear. It's bright. No fog. Oh, what a beautiful day. Glorious. Glorious. Boy. Oh, boy.
You hear that? It's the lyrics of Here We Come a Caroling to the tune of God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. I'm not even saying it's bad, it's just odd. I've never heard that before. Has this been done outside of this production? Is anyone aware of this? I mean, I suppose the lyrics fit the meter of the song. It's interesting to hear the usually upbeat song to this melody, but then again, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen is really that way too. It's got pretty upbeat lyrics to the tune of something dark and gothic. Overall, Lionel Barrymore is a pretty good Scrooge. He has a lot of character to his voice, which goes a long way in an audio format. He does have a tendency to go over the top a bit with some of his delivery, but there's less of that here than in later ones. This does seem to be something he always loved doing, but again, yeah, when you're working with Orson Welles, everyone's game is going to get brought up a little bit. The production as a whole is charming, atmospheric, and well acted. It pays attention to detail in every aspect of the production. Once you've heard Orson Welles speak some of the words from the book, you'll hear them in your head that way every time you read the book, especially since he covers some of the text that most adaptations avoid.
At that moment, nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much.
So I was debating how to cover this aspect of the 1939 radio adaptation, and I decided to do it here. Most people might not find this interesting at all, but if you're listening to this, yeah, you probably will. There are two versions. How are there two versions? I'm not sure. I just know that on YouTube, you can find two different versions, which are both clearly, no question, from 1939. The cast is the same, the script is the same. It is clearly a different performance. I started noticing some differences between the two, and I was wondering if it was just quality or maybe playing the recording at a slightly different speed. But then I remembered there was one word that Orson Welles said differently than the book. The book says darkness is cheap and Scrooge liked it. Liked, past tense. But in the recording I was familiar with from 1939, I had listened to this many times when I was younger, I remembered that Orson Welles said, darkness is cheap and Scrooge likes it. I compared the two versions on YouTube, clearly two different versions. I've done a bit of digging, haven't found others writing about this. I mean, okay, yeah, most people aren't going to listen to two different versions of what is ostensibly the same recording. I just happen to be really familiar with the one, so I knew something sounded wrong. I did see one comment on YouTube that said one was an East Coast, one was a West Coast version. Perhaps that's the case. If I had to guess, one's a rehearsal. But again, I've seen no actual evidence of a second airing, so it could have been an East Coast, West Coast thing. Whichever one you listen to of these two, it doesn't make a difference. You're in for an enjoyable hour. Wells would leave the Campbell Playhouse a few months later, but all the evidence I've found shows that Lionel Barrymore did play the part again in 1940 on the Campbell Playhouse, which continued for a bit without Wells. It may have stopped and started, but by Christmas time 1940, it existed. I've seen some evidence that suggests that Wells produced The Christmas Carol from 1940 as well. That just doesn't seem right to me. Again, he had left Campbell Playhouse over creativity disputes. He was getting too many notes on his scripts, apparently. And by, 1940, he's working on Citizen Kane, right? So I'm not saying he didn't produce the one in 1940, but it seems unlikely to me. We don't have that one either way. In 1941, Barrymore played the role on Rudy Valley's show, Valley Varieties, according to one source, while another source says it was the Rudy Valley Hour. In 1942, Barrymore's Christmas Carol found its longest-running home on his Mayor of the Town series. There was no framing device based on Mayor of the Town, though it would just break for a week while Barrymore played Scrooge. The show ran from September 1942 until July 1949, although it appears that in 1948, Barrymore's Scrooge broadcast was part of a grander extravaganza-type show called NBC's Wrigley's Christmas Festival. But he presumably did it on Mayor of the Town all of those other years. Again, the sources vary, but you probably don't care about these finer points. There are definitely two broadcasts left, and they come to us from existing recordings of the Armed Services Radio. One is listed as being from 1942, and another is listed as being from 1944. There's no reason to doubt the second is from 1944, but I do have my doubts about the former. If it's from 1942, there are two issues. One, the announcer says that, quote, Lionel Barrymore again sets aside his role as Mayor of the Town. Mayor of the Town premiered in September of 1942, so why would they say again? Second of all, the narrator says, A Christmas Eve 100 years ago. A Christmas Carol was written and published in 1843. Sure, you might say it 99 years later or 101 years later, but for me, the telling part here is they don't say this on the 1944 broadcast. So either this is a repeat of the previous year's broadcast that was sent to military radio in 1943, or more likely, it's just from 1943. Intriguingly, there's also one source that puts this version as late as 1947, but I don't think so. Some of the voices here are just obnoxiously American. I say this as an American, but it's a Christmas Carol, you know. You think of those old-timey American radio voices you'd hear in parodies of old-time radio or even old-time film voices. Just listen to Bob Cratchit from the 1944 one.
He gallops and prances and runs like the wind. Hi-ho, Merry Christmas!
Or the narrator from the 1943 one.
Oh, he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was Ebenezer Scrooge. A squeezing, grasping, clutching, covetous old sinner.
Just so we're clear, I'm going to be calling it the 1943 one. It's the earlier one of the two, most likely. These voices, it's just not the same. Also, the narration doesn't feel like Dickens at all, and it has to rush through swaths of text. Because of this, it becomes expository and not scene setting, and there's less of Scrooge himself because the narrator has to describe so much. Plus, no offense to these narrators, but they're not Orson Welles. Unlike the Orson Welles broadcasts, these are not well documented, and the credits don't list all the actors. Alright, ready for some deja vu? Remember way back in the first episode when I said that everyone assumed Claude Rains was the voice of the invisible Jacob Marley in the 1935 Scrooge, simply because the fact got passed around the internet for a while, despite there being no evidence whatsoever? Fun fact, I looked not long ago, saw that someone had actually removed this credit from Wikipedia. I'm not saying this was one of my listeners, but if it was, thank you. Unfortunately, the bad news is I'm a hypocrite. I'm about to assert with near confidence that I know which actor is voicing Jacob Marley in the 1943 broadcast of A Christmas Carol, despite there being absolutely no evidence to prove it.
It is the one I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard.
Alright, I'm almost certain that's Hans Conried, and I say this because he had one of the most unique voices of all time. Conried played Captain Hook in Disney's Peter Pan, Snidely Whiplash in Dudley Do-Right, the Grinch in Halloween is Grinch Night, and many, many other characters in countless projects.
Grinch night. Their troubles will now commence. Oh, I wouldn't stay home on a night like this.
He pops up in a fair bit of Christmas media and other things I've watched, so I am familiar with his voice, and again, I'm 99% sure this is him. I'm also pretty sure it's not him in the 44 one, just an actor going for a vaguely ghost-like voice. Want even more Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast? You can follow me on Patreon, and for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to all episodes 24 hours early. For $5 a month, you will also get a bonus episode every month about a TV episode based on A Christmas Carol. This month's episode is on Alvin and the Chipmunks. Merry Christmas, Mr. Carroll. And for $10 a month, you'll even get the right to vote in polls. Just go to patreon.com/Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast. These two adaptations are more or less working off the same script as each other, and there are some interesting choices in Christmas Past. For example, all we see of school is a young Scrooge alone, being criticized by the schoolmaster for being lonely and crying. We get a brief reference to the schoolmaster in the book when Fan arrives, with a mention of his ferocious condescension. But it's still an odd choice here. The schoolmaster tells Scrooge that Christmas isn't important, which Scrooge presumably took to heart. Of course, this is then followed by the Fezziwig scene, but when I always think of Fezziwig, I think of such a good influence on him. But if we're suggesting the schoolmaster was a major influence on him, it seems to contradict that Fezziwig would have been. I don't know. I'm not saying it couldn't work, but to rush it through and simplify it like this is what doesn't work. You could say maybe the schoolmaster started to take him in one direction, then Fezziwig got him back on course for a bit, then he went back off course. I don't think that's the nuance this is really going for, though. At least we do get the Fezziwig scene, where it's made quite clear that he was a positive influence. It's followed by the ghost mentioning his breakup with Belle, but that scene doesn't play out. Then we do get a scene of Belle and her husband talking about Scrooge 7 Christmas Eves ago. Very odd choice, and I can't wrap my mind around why it was made. Maybe they thought they'd get more in there if they mentioned the breakup and then had Belle and her husband's scene play out, but I think that scene only hits if we've just seen the breakup play out. I've said before on this podcast that if you have to cut a past scene, you cut the Belle and her husband scene. It's fine, but it doesn't tell us anything we don't already know. With Christmas Past, we do at least get a few scenes. Present and Yet to Come give us one each. The scene with the Cratchits and Christmas Present plays out fine, and we do at least get the surplus population line repeated back to Scrooge, which is crucial in his development. The voice of Mrs. Cratchit in the 1944 broadcast sounds really familiar. If anyone can identify it, let me know. I'll give you a shout out on a later episode.
Open the door for them, Belinda.
Oh, yes.
Be careful, Bob.
What's the slippery spot?
Yep. Don't waste any time. Everything's ready.
Sadly, this version does have truly one of the worst Bob Cratchits, Bob's Cratchit, perhaps, in history. His voice can only be described as aggressively American. The one from the 1942 broadcast isn't great or anything, but he's fine. Well, if you thought the Christmas Yet to Come scene was rushed in the 1939 adaptation, just wait. We get a very brief scene at the graveyard, and Barrymore just describes the ghost and the tombstone. It gets worse, though, because, yep, the ghost talks.
Who rests in this lonely, untended earth?
You are that man, Ebenezer Scrooge.
No, Spirit, no.
And who would have known he sounds like an American radio announcer? Why? I don't know. Can't Barrymore just describe what's on the tombstone, too? It really kind of deflates any atmosphere you'd want with this scene. The Christmas morning scenes wrap up pretty quickly, kind of like everything else in these versions. Again, I know it's unfair to say the narrators aren't as good because they aren't Orson Welles, but I mean, it's a considerable step down. Everything about this one feels a little more phoned in. Pretty much on everybody's part. Barrymore is still trying his best, but his voice is broader. And beyond that, the American actors are obvious, and often the sound effects are just described instead of heard. Like the one thing you should get right on radio, but they say, there's clanging chains. Great, we don't hear them. Like I mentioned, Barrymore's show Mayor of the Town aired until early 1949, even though his 1948 Christmas Carol did air somewhere else. His 1949, 1950, and 1951 Christmas carols aired as standalone half-hour programs. And we still have the audio of the 49 and 50 ones. And again, these two have essentially the same script as each other. After those really forgettable Mayor of the Town episodes, it is nice that we have some atmosphere again. They seem to take some inspiration from the Orson Welles versions, as opposed to just rushing through the story beats. There's a score. The narrator, particularly in the 1949 one, actually does a good job of setting the scene.
Marley was dead to begin with. Jacob Marley died just 7 years ago tonight. Did Ebenezer Scrooge know Marley was dead? Of course he did. Scrooge and Marley were partners for I don't know how many years.
And there is nice build-up to Jacob Marley. The Marley actors who might be the same man, I'm not sure. Again, it's hard to find info on these. Both have a good mix of sadness and eeriness. And we even get the exchange from the book about swallowing a toothpick, which is almost never in adaptations. It's in the Alistair Sim one, but barely any others.
Do you see this toothpick?
I do.
But you're not looking at it.
I see it notwithstanding.
Well, I've but to swallow this, and for the rest of my days be persecuted by a legion of goblins. Humbug, I tell you.
Don't do that.
Mercy, dreadful apparition.
I don't know if this adaptation was taken directly from the Orson Welles one. There are a few phrases lifted right from it. Scrooge calling Christmas caroling infernal caterwauling, telling Cratchit to put on his mittens when he's cold, and Mrs. Cratchit in Christmas Yet to Come saying that Tiny Tim's death must be God's will. The first two of these, of course, could just be things that Lionel Barrymore brought to the performance, and because he did them then, he did them here, but he doesn't do them in the Mayor of the Town ones, which makes me think they took it from the Wells one. All of these things I just mentioned are not from the book. They are from the Orson Welles version. Of course, it is not the same script exactly, especially since it's only half an hour long. There's a chance it's the exact script from the 1940 Campbell Playhouse version, but that audio is lost, so we can't know. I wouldn't be surprised if we found out it was, though. Christmas Past limits things just to the bell scene, a rarity. Usually, if there's just one scene, it's Fezziwig, but at least the ghost tells us in detail how much Scrooge had changed. We don't see the transformation, but it is at least spoken of. Christmas Present likewise just gives us one scene, which, of course, is the Cratchits. The 1949 version does give us an amusing live radio blooper.
Here they come, Mother. Father and Tiny in town. Oh, here they are. And Tiny too.
Merry Christmas.
Thankfully, Yet to Come gives us a scene with the Cratchits before going to the graveyard. It might not be a lot, but it's better than just a few seconds in a graveyard and nothing else. These two adaptations feel like more attention was paid to pacing and atmosphere, and while they're just half an hour, we at least can get a bit more involved in the story. Of course, something has to get the short end of the stick in these shorter versions, and here it's Christmas morning. But I mind it less for how they cover the details. Scrooge wakes up happy and talks to a boy on the street. This is the one, of course, who will get the turkey for the Cratchits. Scrooge tells us and the boy that he's going to raise Bob's salary and take care of Tiny Tim. It's with this exchange that the story ends, with the boy running off to buy the turkey. Sure, we don't hear Scrooge saying these things to Bob, but I think this works fairly well, all things considered. The writers clearly wrote the script with the limited runtime in mind and condensed certain things into dialogue in a mostly natural way. For the final 2 Christmases of Lionel Barrymore's life, he would play Scrooge in a production sponsored by Hallmark. The Hallmark Playhouse in 1952 and the Hallmark Hall of Fame in 1953. We have the 1953 performance, albeit in a rerun aired the year after. The script is, once again, a new one. It's not as bare bones as Mayor of the Town, but it's nowhere near as atmospheric as the 1949 and 1950 ones, let alone the Orson Welles one. It relies heavily on narration, even for things we could pick up on with a better script. You don't need to tell us that charity workers are showing up. Just have them show up, have Bob Cratchit greet them, and tell Scrooge who they are. A little bit goes a long way. The narrator isn't quite old-timey radio narrator to the degree of the early 40s ones. But he does kind of sound like he's reading a children's story.
And so on that Christmas Eve came the hour for old Scrooge to lock up and go home. He ate his usual dreary dinner and then climbed the dreary stairs to his own dreary rooms. He closed the door and locked it.
We get even more twists on the past scenes, as this one gives us Scrooge alone at school, followed by Fezziwig. I swear, each version insists on presenting a different combination of these scenes. However, in the first scene, we do get to hear Scrooge mentioning Ali Baba and Robinson Crusoe, quite rare for any adaptation. Admittedly, it's barely a scene, because young Scrooge doesn't say anything, we just hear old Scrooge and the ghost talking about it. This is followed by a very brief scene of Fezziwig, and that's all for the past. Christmas Present is, you guessed it, no more than the Cratchit scene. Like clockwork, you can expect it to go this way in the shorter versions. However, Christmas Yet to Come plays out a bit differently than some other versions. He speaks right from the beginning.
Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? Oh, Ebenezer Scrooge.
It feels like these radio versions, understandably, struggled with this ghost. He's entirely silent, which works well in a book and on film, but it's a bit harder in radio. Does Scrooge just talk to him and get no answer? That is, the exchange that happens in the book, of course. Does the narrator describe him, or do you leave that out too? I think either of these options would be better than just having the ghost speak, but here we are. It's also just the graveyard scene and nothing else. This one actually has a considerably long Christmas morning, all things considered. There's the interaction with the boy on the street, Scrooge telling people Merry Christmas on the street, Scrooge making up with Fred, and the scene with Bob Cratchit the next day. Like so many of these half-hour ones, the pacing is bizarre, and there just isn't a lot of time spent with the ghosts. I get wanting to set up and wrap up the story, but the whole of the three ghosts here takes less than 10 minutes. It's quite rushed. Unfortunately, it is easy to tell in this one that Lionel Barrymore was getting up there in years. He sounds tired, so it's not surprising that it was his last performance. I don't want to say he ever phoned it in, because he does always seem to genuinely enjoy playing the role. And the way he talked about it, of course, he was an actor, but he sure seemed passionate about playing the role. There are brief snippets of him talking about it after a few of these, and it seems something he really loved doing. However, he does seem more committed when the script is better. You'll hear him going broader on those Mayor of the Town ones, but reining it in more just a few years later on the 49 and 51, meaning he still had it. There are, briefly, 3 more performances of A Christmas Carol that involve Lionel Barrymore. The first is the 1938 MGM film, which I talked about on my very first episode. Barrymore was supposed to play the role, but due to some physical problems, he was unable and was replaced by Reginald Owen. If you're curious, I'm being deliberately vague on what led him not to play the role. This was a man who suffered from a lot of physical ailments. I've heard various ones attributed to him dropping out. He may have even contradicted himself a few times. I don't want to pass along false information. Some physical problem got in the way. Barrymore did, however, narrate the trailer for the film, and we even see him sitting in a chair introducing the film in the trailer. He was already that closely associated with the role. The second is from the same year, the 1938 radio adaptation where Orson Welles plays the role. I've been debating where to put this, but I'm going to put it aside for a future episode. I've got some interesting things I want to talk about with that one, and I think it'd be better suited for another episode. Finally, there's a 1947 record where Barrymore played Scrooge. This one is just 23 minutes in length, which is even a little quicker than the approximately 25 minutes these would get on radio. I don't think this one comes to us from a radio production, but I could be wrong. I haven't found anything to suggest it does. It was later re-released in the 1950s as half of an album, but the other half was just Christmas songs. Don't get your hopes up if you see an hour-long Lionel Barrymore production from the 50s. It's just this. One thing I will give every radio version we've heard: they don't cut the charity workers. This one does, though. It also relies heavily on the narrator, character actor Richard Hale, who tells us that Scrooge and the ghosts visit a lot of places, but we only hear a handful of the scenes actually playing out.
The Spirit led the way to many scenes that Scrooge had long forgotten. He was shown some happy Christmases of long ago when he was a youth. And best of all, the Spirit took him to the warehouse where he had been an apprentice.
This is very likely the earliest adaptation of any kind that is really for children. We're still 15 years from Mr. Magoo, and even longer from the first Disney version, but this very much feels like a kid's adaptation. We see Scrooge alone at school in the past, but we're then told that he also had many happy Christmases when he was young, presumably before Fezziwig, which is odd. We get a jolly scene with Fezziwig, and a brief mention of Scrooge seeing Marley on his deathbed, which is a first for these. I don't know why it mentions this, since nothing is done with it anyway. It does include Scrooge putting the spirit out with his extinguisher cap, though, and the narrator says the ghost would have shown him more. Now, this actually goes against the book. Scrooge, in fact, does extinguish the past, but the ghost has already made it clear he's seen the last shadow he's going to show him. When Scrooge walks the street on Christmas Day, very briefly, he mentions seeing children playing on sleds. We then get a very brief snippet of the Cratchit scene, and the ghost explaining it to Scrooge for most of the time. There's also a brief mention of them going other places, including the ghost showing him
misery and want as well as happiness.
Misery and want, which is the closest we'll get to ignorance and want in any of these versions. Christmas Yet to Come is silent here, and the scene is just a tombstone. There aren't even references to seeing other things. Like the later radio ones, on Christmas morning, we get Scrooge with the boy, Fred, and Bob Cratchit in the finale. It really focuses on the happiness and lightness in the story, while only including a bit of the darkness, much like the 1938 film. Like I said, I don't think this was a radio production, but I do wonder if Lionel Barrymore's dialogue was just taken from one of those instead of having him record new lines. There are scenes that are just described, like Marley's death, so it feels like the narrator is making up for not having more of their Scrooge actor. I could be entirely wrong, but let's just say I wouldn't be surprised if this one did not have Lionel Barrymore's direct involvement. So, what is the legacy of Lionel Barrymore's Scrooge? He played the role for nearly 20 years, more times than nearly every famous Scrooge in film and TV did. Most of them only played him once. Alistair Sim played him twice. Keep in mind that before that iconic Alistair Sim version in 1951, which came out just a few years before Barrymore's death, there were only two sound film versions of A Christmas Carol, the 1935 and 1938 versions. There were more on TV, most are sadly lost, but those mostly aired once and were destroyed. The Lionel Barrymore Christmas Carol was a tradition every year. Even if the script was different, the network it aired on was different, and even the day it aired on was different. It was a tradition to hear him play the character every year. For those who grew up in that era, he was the voice of Scrooge. Did his Scrooge influence others? As I mentioned in the second episode, I'm quite sure it influenced Taylor Holmes in 1949's The Christmas Carol, as he is undoubtedly doing a Lionel Barrymore impression, and not a very good one.
Every idiot that goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding.
I think you could even argue there's a bit of him in Albert Finney's take on the character as well. Of course, we only ever heard Barrymore's voice, so we can't say what his Scrooge would have been like on screen. He did play Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life, who, like Scrooge, is a miser and a greedy businessman, but that's really where the comparisons end. Potter has no redeeming characteristics whatsoever, and he sees no redemption or even a shot at it by the end of the movie. Plus, unlike Scrooge, he is thoroughly and entirely corrupt. I find the 1939 radio version to be essential listening for any Christmas Carol fan, or Orson Welles fan, even if for nothing more than hearing Orson Welles reading Dickens' words. Of course, there are plenty of other reasons to like it as well. If you want to go beyond that, start with the 1949 or 1950 versions, which still have atmosphere and heart. The rest are really just for completionists. If you have nostalgia for them or you really just enjoy old-time radio, you'll probably enjoy them for those factors alone. So that is the first episode I've done on audio Christmas carols. I kind of had to start with Lionel Barrymore because, again, 2 decades of playing Scrooge on the radio. There are ones before him and ones after him. I'm not going chronologically here. I will do more of these in the future, especially if people enjoy this, want to hear more about radio versions. Next month, I'm going to do something different, though. I'm going to do a much lighter kind of take on things. I'm going to go through reviews of versions of A Christmas Carol that I've covered and read some 1-star reviews of good versions, mostly on Letterboxd, but other places probably too. 5-star reviews of versions I don't like. I want to see both to laugh at, people who hated versions I love because that's funny. But I also want to see genuinely what people love about versions I don't like. Rich Little's Christmas Carol. Are there fans of these more obscure versions even? I love hearing different opinions on the consensus because whether it's a joke or whether it's serious, I want to hear what people have to say. So I'm going to go through reviews of the versions I've covered to date. So maybe not every single last version, but versions up from 1935 to Muppet Christmas Carol. We'll be reading some reviews. We're going to have some fun. That's next month. Very different. In the future, I am going to do more audio Christmas carols, including that Orson Welles version. But stay tuned on this episode. I'm going to have a few more personal thoughts, recollections about the version here that I grew up with, and everything else. And thank you for listening to Scrooge, a Christmas Carol podcast. So, there we have it. Those are all the Lionel Barrymore versions of A Christmas Carol. Definitely the most adaptations I've ever covered in one episode. I debated how I wanted to do this because, again, I love that 1939 version. I have a nice memory of listening to that when I would say maybe 12, 13, 14, that era of my life. And I hear Orson Welles' voice in my head when I read the book. I knew the story very well by that point, but still, it was a nice thing to have. I listened to it a lot, I think. That's one that I consider doing a whole episode on by itself. The reason I didn't is because all of the later versions kind of run together. I didn't want to do an episode just on those half-hour versions where I was just saying, well, this one's kind of short, and moving on. Well, this one's also kind of short, and the last one's also kind of short. So I decided that I would just do all the Lionel Barrymore in one and leave the Orson Welles as Scrooge one for another day. It's not that it's, like miles better than the other one with Lionel Barrymore made by Orson Welles. I just wanted to dedicate this episode to Barrymore, and then we'll talk about Welles in another episode. Maybe I'll do one where I just talk about the most famous actors to play Scrooge on radio. We've got one with Laurence Olivier, and we've got one with Orson Welles, and there might be another. I don't think Ronald Colman quite falls into that, but we're talking like the most famous actors of all time. If we did Welles and Olivier in one episode, that'd be kind of cool. So maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do an episode on, you know, most famous actors of all time who played Scrooge, and I'll call it something better than that, obviously. I think that's how I'll handle that one. But I will do one too where I discuss either quickly or maybe even at some length the earliest audio versions, because there are early ones from at least the 20s, 30s before Barrymore. So again, this has been being adapted since it existed in every medium you can imagine. It's been adapted into. I don't claim to cover every single medium possible because that would take forever. The podcast really started just to be about film and TV, but I've branched out a bit during the off season. It's kind of fun to do these wild card episodes, and I hope they're fun for you. I know the one I did on VeggieTales actually seemed to do pretty well. I don't just judge it based on numbers, by the way. I don't say, "Oh, this one did well. I'm going to do more just like that." Because no, I'm doing what I want to do. Honestly, like I just make this first and foremost for myself, and if people also like it, great. But I don't see, oh, I did an episode on VeggieTales that did 3 times better than the silent movies ones. Therefore, I'm going to do 4 more based on Christian children's media. No, not how I'm going to handle this. I'm doing the episodes I want to do. I'm doing the main podcast as my primary focus, and that's always going to be chronological. What I do in the wild card season, off season, whatever you want to call it, is really just what do I feel like doing? What feels important to the legacy of A Christmas Carol? So that's why I do these. And for me, the 1939 Lionel Barrymore at recording is quite crucial to A Christmas Carol for me and my history with the story. And I think it was for a lot of people who grew up when it would have originally aired as well. So in the 30s, 40s, 50s, I imagine they have a lot of their Scrooge shaped by Lionel Barrymore, no matter which versions they grew up hearing. I wish we had more of these available. Particularly, I'd love to hear the pre Orson Welles ones, because not counting those, we do have one from every era of Barrymore's Scrooge, except that 1 year in between Campbell Playhouse and Mayor of the Town. And this is one of those things where when I was researching this, I saw different sources saying different things. One said he didn't do it on Mayor of the Town in 1942, and another one did. So maybe there's 2 in between. I don't know. But I know Mayor of the Town ran from 42 to 49, ended before Christmas of 49, and in 48 he definitely did it on a different show. So, I mean, I'm gonna include the sources I used, but again, these appear to just be radio fans blogging about it. I don't see any official sources, and unfortunately, that's the best I can do. I know it probably doesn't matter to most people. I just care about getting facts right here. So just know that this episode is not me making any definitive statements about when it aired, unless I have actual confirmation. We have a lot about the Orson Welles ones. Because, again, Orson Welles, one of the most prominent filmmakers of all time. And his radio theater was really innovative too. People remember The War of the Worlds, of course, but he took a very serious approach to doing these radio adaptations of beloved drama. There's a famous Dracula he did. There's Treasure Island, Rebecca, I believe, a bunch of others. And he really used the medium to his advantage in a way that you can tell in these other ones they didn't. He built the scenes well with music and sound effects, and the sound effects are great. And on at least the one we have from 1938, where Orson Welles plays Scrooge, he even like shouts out his sound effects team, and it's very nice because he was always someone who, don't get me wrong, had a huge ego, but he always would shout out the other members of his team as well. He was a good collaborator, which is sometimes forgotten about any singular figure in film. Unfortunately, people forget how much film and radio and TV and everything is a collaboration. So he was a great collaborator as well. And you can hear a lot of the actors from Citizen Kane in the 1939 version of A Christmas Carol. Joseph Cotten, one of the most famous actors from Citizen Kane, who went on to a great career of his own, not in that version, but when we get to the 1938 version, he is in that. So you will hear some Joseph Cotten, who's one of my favorite actors of the golden age of Hollywood, but not in this version. And Orson Welles clearly loved working with Lionel Barrymore, spoke so well of him. And there's a weird remake from the 1970s of It's a Wonderful Life called It Happened One Christmas, starred Marlo Thomas as a gender-swapped George Bailey, but not really because she's playing Mary Bailey. So it is a character from the film, but she's the kind of character that George was in that film. So George is more of a, secondary character, and that Mary is the main character. It's not good. It almost follows It's a Wonderful Life to the letter of the law beyond that, barring what would need to be changed. It's not all gender swap, like it still has a lot of male characters who were male characters in the original. But anyway, I say that to mention that Lionel Barrymore played Mr. Potter in the original. Orson Welles plays Mr. Potter in the remake. And I am sure he's doing that out of tribute to Lionel Barrymore. He does a weird accent in that, and I'm not sure if he's trying to sound like Lionel Barrymore and failing or what. But it's not a very good movie. Even Orson Welles can't save it. He's not very memorable in it. But I imagine he took it because he wanted to do a Lionel Barrymore bit. The later ones here, like I said, yeah, they're short. There's not a lot to them. But if you're going to listen to them, the 49 and 1950 ones really are the ones to go to. I quite like those. And I do like that Hans Conried is in the one. And I know, I said that's definitely not Claude Rains. I still think I'm right. And here I'm going against my own thing about not sourcing and just saying with no evidence this is definitely Hans Conried, because, yeah, I know that voice. That is him. He has that really, really unique inflection, and I'm almost confident that's him. So that is all I have to say about these Lionel Barrymore ones. Like I said, some of the sourcing might be wrong. Some people say the one's from 42, some say it's from 47. I think it's from 43. Again, we have a general idea. We're not always quite sure, but it gives us at least a taste of what people were listening to every year on the radio. So leave me a comment if you have any thoughts about these, any nostalgia for these. Some of these were definitely repackaged. Obviously, the 39 one I talked about, I had it on CD. I think there's a later radio version, perhaps, that was repackaged, and then there was obviously the record version from 47. So these have been a part of Christmas for a long time and long after they aired. Yeah, leave me a comment. Which of these do you like? What do you like about them? Anything else, obviously. And thank you for listening to Scrooge, a Christmas Carol podcast. Scrooge, a Christmas Carol podcast is written, edited, and hosted by Colin Murr. Theme music is Christmas Day by TRG Banks. Clips in this episode are from various radio versions of A Christmas Carol from the 1930s to the 1950s. Halloween is Grinch Night, 1949's The Christmas Carol, as well as the 1947 Christmas Carol album. Leaving a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing on YouTube will be a big help to me. I'll be back next month with another episode of Scrooge, a Christmas Carol podcast. Until then, make sure to live in the past, present, and the future, and ensure that the spirits of all three strive within you.